Mm. That's a very nice example of this. Sorry.
Can I ask
There's a
Mark
nice.
and Bertalan, can you hear me or not?
Yes,
Absolutely.
we can hear you.
Please.
Okay, I, I hope you don't mind. I'm supposed to be coming in only at the end of this morning to give a summing up, but your conversation is irresistible, and I hope you don't mind me jumping in, because I think that there is a risk in the way that you've handled the discussion in the last few minutes to take it in one direction, but not to be balanced. Because it is very easy to have spent the morning listening to and hearing about stunning innovations, and now hear two very trustworthy individuals talking about how they really would like to make better use of health data and pointing out the fact that we have, especially in Europe, since 1998, some of the most stringent data protection regulations on the planet. But I would like to ask you back, are you feeling, and is your emphasis, that it's time for us to revoke that approach to protecting privacy? Are you saying that if we want to develop innovations in healthcare, we need to be persuading the public to give us their data without safeguards, or with what safeguards? I'm just
Such a
pushing you to
wonderful
be a bit
question.
more clear about what your
Of
ask
course,
really
please.
is of the public.
Thank you for raising the issue and asking the question. I think GDPR should remain in place. I think it was a very important step forward. I think it's not the government's or regulatory agency's job to persuade the public about such decisions to make. The point I'm trying to emphasize here is more of a long term is more about a long term vision of healthcare. And my next line might be a bit too um, optimistic or forward looking here, but bear with me. I think that digital health gives us a chance to make our health and quality of life depend more on our individual access to information and technologies than to purely depend on the country's healthcare system where we pay taxes or where we live, where we belong to. I know it's very individualistic, but digital health primarily makes healthcare globalized, whether it's good or not, whether it's ideal or not, whether it's evidence based or not. By making globalized, I mean that the way I can reach out to companies and startups worldwide, analyzing my data in different clouds, belonging to different countries, healthcare and privacy framework systems, I have a chance to receive simply a better healthcare in general that might, just might, give me a higher chance for a longer and healthier life. For that, I don't need my government's approval. I, of course, I want to use evidence-based technologies only in my care. That's why I have a partner physician who helps me in that. I don't want to lead my healthcare. I want to be involved very much because it's about my health and disease management. But I think it must be my choice at the end of the day about which technologies I want to be involved in my care, how much information I want to share or not. And that decision should belong to me, not to my healthcare system. Just one example about how it should work. On Iceland, the government worked with a private company, um, and they wanted to they sequenced the DNA of tens of thousands of Icelandic people, and based on that huge amount of data set, they were able to tell if there are some people with a higher risk for breast cancer and even ovarian cancer. You know, BRCA gene is responsible for that. And they had a chance to tell those patients that you have a higher risk for that condition, so you might want to take some precautions or discuss it with your medical professional. But of course, that would be quite a high level of breach of privacy for those patients. So it has become an opt-in system that patients should have the knowledge that they might be able to access such information, and they can opt in to then share some of their data, but get health benefits in reward or in exchange. But it should never be the other way around. My government persuading me to give them more data so I get better health benefits. I'm not saying that's the perfect framework, or if I'm aware of a perfect framework, I'm not. But I like to keep that discussion on the individual ground ethically, rather than giving this decision to healthcare governments or even private companies. Of course not.
So I'm going to interview you now a question, Mark. But Bertalan, first, I'd like to say it's wonderful that you have emphasized the entrepreneurial spirit of the individual and the opportunity for individuals to be able to pioneer or to be part of an inventing group that creates innovations and to use their data voluntarily for that purpose. But Mark, I'd like to ask you to react to that, because your responsibility is for a hospital and a catchment area that contains a complete diversity of people. And you've got to provide services for everybody. So how do you balance? You used the word equilibrium earlier. And I wonder how you balance that word equilibrium and your geographical landscape where you have to provide care with the assertions and the very exciting vision that Bertalan has proposed. How do you see it?
It's a tricky one. A few weeks ago, I was involved in a discussion to give you one practical problem. I was in a discussion on a reimbursement of a new drug for a very rare disease. And as you know, many companies have pipelines with probably very effective drugs, but very expensive drugs because of the very small number of patients. Now, we were discussing a new financing model to be able to pay for those treatments. And it would be a kind of a shared risk model where the company in question would accept to share the risk of failure or non-failure of the drug in terms of reimbursement, in terms of pricing. Now, in order to be able to make the calculus, the company needed all the data on the patient, the real patients who would receive this drug. So the so-called real-world evidence or real-world data. Now, suppose that one of those patients would say, there are 10 patients like this in Belgium, and we would need all data from those 10 patients. Suppose there are 2 patients who say, I am not willing to share my medical data for this, thereby jeopardizing the reimbursement for the 8 others, or the 10 in total. I mean, these are very practical questions that come above water in terms of share the privacy, share the data or not. Not only for your own good, but also for your kins, for your peers who are in the same problem. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an ethicist, I'm not a philosopher, but I'm a doctor and running a hospital, and I have these patients in front of me who might be helped if we would able to come up with a system where we could use their data. And so there for me that is the culprit of the problem, which right prevails? Is it the individual right not to share the data, or the individual right and linked to a collective right to be able to procure a possible treatment? So that is I don't have the answer, to be honest. I don't know where the answer is, but it is something with a problem with which we are confronted, not every day, but regularly. So that is one part of the answer. And the other one is talking about real-world evidence and real-world data. There are a lot of initiatives now contacting hospitals for, let's say, a data broker, companies that new spin-off companies that are contacting hospitals to obtain the very vast amount of health data that are available in our systems. And that is another question, I think, where we should prepare, hopefully, at least a national, but hopefully a European or maybe global legal framework in order to be able to share these data, which are anonymous or encrypted, if you want, but which are really sources of information and maybe of new treatments, etc. So these are two practical things I'm confronted with, and to be very honest, I don't have the golden answer.
But I think these are complicated questions, and it's not reasonable, really, for an individual or for a small geographical area or an organization to be left in that position on its own. I think we've got to bring society in much more solidly into these issues. I mean, Bertalan, you've emphasized very importantly that if we were over prescriptive with data protection, and if we really lock the data down, we delay innovation, we delay creativity. And I think it was Lucien who mentioned that sometimes innovations have early adopters. They're not equitable on day one, but they penetrate and they become equitable over time. How do you think we should be balancing the data protection? And you said we shouldn't revoke the GDPR, but Bertalan, you've also sold us the value and the excitement of innovation and the energy of individuals to do that. How do we find that balance, do you think? So I'm not hearing you, Bertalan. Can we just check if you're... Maybe it's my mic. Mark, I hope you don't mind me jumping in, but
No.
You've got too much knowledge to be the moderator. You need to be responding.
I'll play that role with pleasure.
Well, we can do a double act, but I just feel you've got too much experience for us to be not benefiting from your input. But let's see if we can have Bertalan also coming in. Do you know if Raphael and Lucien will rejoin us as well or not?
I think they might be in private chat boxes, but I'm not really sure. Nico will tell you.
Here.
He'll tell us.
If you can hear me?
Yeah?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. No, I could not join the private sessions for... I'm not sure what reason, but I've been watching and listening to the three of you with excitement, and I'll be happy to jump in if you guys allow me for a few minutes at least.
Yeah, that's lovely. Well, should we just let Bertalan answer the question, because his sound may now be back again, and then I think you react. Why not? And Mark, I apologize. I'm not sure if I'm behaving well or badly in this by jumping in.
You're behaving perfectly. Thank you.
So Bertalan, can we hear you again and try your sound?
No.
So maybe then let's give him a chance to reboot or whatever he may need to do.
You can now hear me?
Lucien, do you want to jump in then? You've been listening and getting excited, so tell us why.
Slow.
I have trouble hearing now.
Oh,
I don't hear Bertel.
Was it Raphael and not Lucien? Maybe I misheard the voice.
Yes, I am here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So, do you have a question for me? I did not get that.
Well, we're in the middle of really a discussion about a difficult balance to be found between people who are cautious about their data being used by people they don't know, by organizations they don't know, in countries they don't know, for purposes that sound like they're all exciting and innovative, but may not be. They've got no way of knowing. And yet at the same time, if we are over prescriptive about data protection, we end up delaying innovation and creativity. And sometimes it's a collective thing. But in the example of the rare disease Mark mentioned, it's a bit more personal. 2 people might actually prevent an innovation reaching 8 people. So it can be more personal than just, big crowd decision making. How do we find the right balance there?
Yeah, unfortunately,
it's an impossible question. So it's really just getting your opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very complex issue, as Bertrand was saying. I don't think that there is a perfect answer. I don't think that there's an answer that would fit every ear. Unfortunately, I do think, and I'm very sort of emphatic in my opinion on this. My data is my data, and it's my right to share it or not to whomever I trust enough to share the data with. I think that the problem is that I think the public needs to have some proof that you really mean well. I think that there's no other way around that. Unfortunately, we've seen how technology is biased, and how humans who create the technology make it biased, and there is too much background on that for people to really trust, and especially trust a government, and even less a private company with their own sort of voluntarily given data. So I don't think there is an answer that would really please everyone.
Can I jump in now?
See if we could get Bertrand's reaction to that. Is your sound recovered now?
Hopefully. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yeah. I can hear you. Hey,
fantastic.
Hooray. Come on, we want to hear your reaction.
For the third time,
so Lucian has thrown you an
I love where the discussion is heading, and of course, and thank you so much for asking these great questions. Of course, we agree upon that. It's the responsibility of a government to make sure that they take care of their people. Of course, that's step number 1. But you mentioned that, maybe I don't know if you said it exactly like that, but you mentioned that people shouldn't be left alone with such decisions to make. And I don't feel I'm left alone, because it would imply that I'm a passive stakeholder of healthcare. But in fact, I'm a very proactive, empowered patient. I have entered healthcare before having any medical conditions to manage. I mean, hopefully, or fortunately. I'm the one leading my disease and health management with an amazing partnership I have with my primary care physician. And I think that's what I'm not raising solutions here, but that's the new approach that we working in healthcare all have to embrace, that empowered patients don't need our protective help. They don't need us to make systems for them, so we will take care of them when they have a diagnosis to deal with. Empowered patients are very much proactive. In fact, I think they should be the newest member of the medical team, being the most underused resource of healthcare for 2,000 years. I'm not challenging back the question in any ways. I just want to raise the issue that empowered patients are proactive. They don't need us as in the traditional hierarchy of the doctor-patient relationship, being like a parental guide for them in their healthcare journey. They need partners, and they look for partnerships they can build with their data, with their expertise they get in disease and health management. And of course, they would still feel doomed with a lot of information and data to manage. And that's why they need the expertise of their medical professionals, but again and again, on an equal level partnership. So governments should keep on trying to regulate technologies and put the evidence-based background behind them. But we all have to understand and acknowledge that proactive, empowered patients might reach out to technologies that are not safe yet or not have been regulated yet. And that's why we have to be much quicker than before. We don't have a choice anymore. It's a must. Just like in the case of the pandemic, how telemedical care became a must, not a choice.
Interesting.
Can I react to that?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Mark. React
yes.
to that.
Yes. I think one of the what Bertalan is describing is also what is happening in the real world, so we cannot ignore it. One of the risks I see in this, the way this would evolve, is that we might be lacking what I would call an intuitive integration into the clinical workflow of doctors. What I mean is, if every empowered patient is finding solutions for him or her disease, let's say, that is a thing that things that are happening. But one of the reasons of the frustrations of the physicians in clinical practice is, in my opinion, is that there are so many technological evolutions for the moment which are not yet integrated into the workflow of the doctors and nurses. And this, in my opinion, might be one of the reasons why we see those huge numbers of, you can call it burnout or people leaving the profession, or even Atul Gawande writing his paper on why doctors hate their computers. I see in clinical practice that doctors and nurses lose a lot of time in trying to manage these, let's say, individual evolutions that we see in the technological world. One reason, for instance, is the telemonitoring of patients, of cardiac patients in the heart rhythm clinic. If this is not really integrated into the clinical workflow, it's an extra burden for the nurses or doctors who have to contact those patients, etc. So it might be a source of frustration and of inefficient time usage. I think we should try to integrate more or better the useful stuff that technology develops into the clinical workflows of every day in the clinic.
Raphael, when you started speaking early on this morning, you were actually more provocative. Mark was challenging whether today's models are fit for purpose. You even used, I think, the word unacceptable. I mean, Mark is describing the importance, but the challenge. Do you think that the innovations that you were actually telling us about this morning can also help empower patients and help clinical workflows to better engage patients as an active player?
Absolutely. I think that, like I mentioned, it's not really the technology, it's not really the platform, the innovation, is the use, the smart use of that particular solution, right? The problem with the technology implemented into the workflow of physicians, causing the discontent, and then the syndrome of burnout. Burnout is a laboral condition, right? It's not a disease, but in the ICD-11, it's a condition related to work. And I think that when we try to patch and implement all these technologies that we use for other things into the healthcare process in the wrong way, then it causes the physicians not just not to be happy, but to get sick, to burn out. That's why we have high levels of attrition and depression and anxiety and even suicide. And it's not a minor thing. What they call pajama time. You're done with your shift, but you still have 3 hours of charting to do because the technology was not implemented well enough or not created well enough in order to get those 3 hours into your daily workflow, because the technology is not good. So I think that the way we're doing healthcare today is almost shameful. It's unacceptable, because we have the technology to make it much better, and we are not doing so. And I think that the technologies absolutely will benefit the patients, because the patient being the coach of the whole dynamic, I think the patient benefits directly or indirectly. Some of these technologies, call it VR or AR, or used to educate. We talk about educating students, educating providers, educating patients and relative of patients. So imagine using immersive VR, not to just have the surgeon navigate the potential target during surgery, but imagine that to have the patient navigate the actual disease. So how much better can a patient understand having an aneurysm in the middle cerebral artery than going with a virtual reality headset and going into their own angiography anatomy and see it there and show the daughter and get then real consent, informed consent about the particular problem. So I think that in many ways.
Very powerful.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry for jumping in, but I
can
have
I
to
ask
leave
you a
for my
question?
private Q&A session.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I have to leave for my private Q&A session, unfortunately. So
Oh, okay.
It's been amazing
Well, I'd like you
talking
to.
with you, but
I'd
I
like
have
to.
to.
Do you have a? If you have 10 seconds, I want to just ask you: can
Of course.
patients help clinicians invent innovations that clinicians will use?
Absolutely. We call it patient design, which is very
Right.
much different from patient centricity, which is just an approach.
Yeah.
Patient design is a practical method that we involve patients on the highest level of decision making in an organization, a company, a startup, even a regulatory agency like the FDA has a patient advisory board. So through patient design, not just it's possible to invite patients to the same table so they can contribute. They have a lot to contribute to that table, but they should be sitting at the same table as clinicians do when coming up with technologies, innovations, even processes. My favorite example is coming from a Dutch hospital in Nijmegen when they designed a new facility for the hospital and they invited their chronic patients to have their voices heard before the first design was ready. So designers, engineers, architects could work on the ideas patients could bring to the table. That's patient design, and I very much hope that patient design is going to be embraced by every healthcare government, even pharma company and organization in the coming year or so.
Great.
And with that, I really have to leave for the private Q&A session.
Sorry.
It was a
Sorry for
pleasure
stealing your extra time, but thank you for that
Of course.
input.
It was a pleasure to see you all and have a nice
Great to see you,
day and
Bertrand.
Thank you, Bertrand.
let's see the others at the
Nice to
private
see you.
Q&A session.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So do you think, I mean, I'm a great fan of co-creation, co-design, of patients being active players in their healthcare, in joint decision-making, being well-informed, well-empowered. But I know at times from professional colleagues that there are resistance factors. I'm afraid maybe it's fear-based, maybe it's just, what's been your experience of the empowerment? Is there a counter movement, a fear-based anxiety or other reasons for caution?
Well, actually, we do have a patient advisory board at our hospital where we invite. The first thing is who are you going to invite to be member of your patient advisory board? Well, every hospital and every physician knows these patients who really are on top of things, chronic patients for the most part. And they advise us. They are free consultants. You can hire McKinsey or you can have a patient advisory board, and they advise us on the processes we use in our hospital and which were designed by the system, or doctors or administrators. And then the patient comes with an idea. Said, why don't you do this or do you do that? That's one thing that we do. The second thing is. Every outpatient patient that we see, and it's about 400,000 a year, they get an email or text message for the NPS score with open text, so they can give us advice, and we can see trends coming up from these free advices that we get from the patients, and every 2 or 3 years or so. We perform a very thorough questionnaire on about 4,000 of our patients on values, on not on medical stuff, not on was your pneumonia treated well or something, but it's on the value system of the hospital and on the humanitarian approach that we try to not to forget in our very technical and technical savvy world. So actually, we are really fond of these new, well, not so new, we do it for more than 10 years now. And I think it's an amazing source of information.
Wow.
Raphael, reactions from you?
Yeah, I'm just very jealous, I must say, by what I hear Mark saying. I wish we had patient engagement, on my own little world, of practicing, as an employed physician, in my own sort of ecosystem. I do get patient engagement, and I ask for it because I think that the patient is the main stakeholder of everything we do, everything I do for sure. Unfortunately, at the hospital level or even regional level or state level or national level, I think that there's very, very little of that what you're describing, Mark. And it's a shame because, and that's part of why I say, we're so far behind in the times. I think that the best design is the one that involves the main user of whatever discipline we're talking about. And in the case of healthcare design, the patient is the main stakeholder. And we just built a brand new hospital, $300 million, and there was very, very little patient or even physician involvement or opinion. So it's very shameful. Maybe, you are in the old world and things are more advanced in there, I want to say. It must be that because there are certain, specific examples where that is not the case here in the States. But in general, I would say that patients have very, very little saying of anything from the design of the structural building to any process or decision making within the system.
No, that's interesting. I'd like to ask you both a slightly different question, but related to this. I mean, I believe that in our audience, we should have a number of SMEs, entrepreneurs, listening to this discussion. And to some extent, I'd love to know if we can inspire them or if we need to disappoint them. Now, many of those innovators are making things for patients to use, apps, wearables. And Raphael, early in your presentation, you showed us how the phone and the watch are bringing, if you like, knowledge, decision-making, empowerment right to the fingertips and the wrists of the patients. And the SMEs in this audience are probably excited by those opportunities. But are we going to say to them, actually, health systems are so far behind being disruption ready that you're going to be equipping patients with tools that their clinicians will resent? Or are we saying it's reasonable, it's exciting to get patients to be part of the disruption that helps healthcare respond better to patient centricity? What's your feeling? Do we give our SME audience optimism or pessimism? Each of you in random order.
Yeah, Mark, please.
Yeah, a few years ago, we organized at our hospital, at our Faculty of Medicine, actually, we organized a kind of a hackathon thing between master students in medicine and master students in engineering, because those are two completely separated worlds. And engineers, they can make fancy stuff which nobody needs. And those students in medicine, they needed a zillion things, but nobody would make it, or it wouldn't be on the market. So just in French, they say, du choc des idées jaillit la lumière. From the shock of ideas comes light and enlightenment, actually. And this was so productive and good to have those two worlds meet and interchange ideas, that it gives me, on your question about the SMEs, it's a very good question. Maybe we should think of a forum where they can actually meet with the medical world and needs that there are for the moment, which we have, and not so much the other way around. It can be a lucky shot that you invent something and make something that proves to be the...
I'll put our institute forward. We would love to help host those.
Yeah.
So definitely. Raphael, what's your reaction? Are you cheering up the SMEs or are you disappointing them?
No, always cheering and trying to inspire. Absolutely. No, I think that it's pretty clear to me. Just like Mark was saying, anything needs multiple inputs. The more diverse, the better. I've been involved in many hackathons at MIT, most of them, or at the Google headquarters here in Boston, because I live in the Northeast in Maine, and as a mentor, as a judge, and as a participant. And there's nothing better, because then you get all sorts of different backgrounds together for 2 or 3 days creating something. And that is the best product, the product that has the more taste, the product that is more exquisite, the product that comes from many different places. And I'm currently involved in a big project with an MIT group, basically creating an AI algorithm to address burnout before it happens, to detect the early signs of burnout before it happens. And we are in the process of, it's something sponsored by the National Science Foundation, where we're going from companies to companies to ask for opinions. What do you think? Are you going to use this product? We're asking patients, we're asking companies. It's like a discovery phase. And I think that any product, in anything in general, but in healthcare specifically, if you are a developer who is going to develop an app or a solution, you must involve patients, you must involve physicians, you must involve the government, the administrators, everyone who has a say to get the best product out there, because otherwise you're going to fail in one of those instances. I think that is very, very important. So it should be an optimistic message, and I think that things are getting that way. People is realizing that, because only the ones who do that are the ones who may become the unicorn out there.
Now that's really interesting. I'd like to now slight shift of emphasis again to, if you like, almost the business model topic. Because when I engage a lot with SMEs in the health sector, they have sometimes worked with enthusiast clinicians to create a solution that would make a difference to the way that clinician or that clinical team could treat their patients. Maybe it's relating to workflows and workloads and efficiency. Maybe it's relating to improving outcomes. But then they want to sell it. And they find health systems say, well, it's very nice, but we can't afford it. It doesn't come inside our business model. We don't have a budget for this area of innovation this year. Ask me next year. And of course, next year they don't either. So there is a risk that if you take clinicians and patients and industry together, you create solutions that are really valuable, really needed, fantastic, but don't fit with health system funding priorities with gaps. And therefore, effectively, the market element is missing. How do we tackle that? Have you come across that issue, and how do we tackle it?
If I may answer, that's precisely the missing link. You must involve that other element, the healthcare system, because they'll know their budget. The healthcare system, meaning the administrators, they know their budget. Once, if the product is good and it's a solution, it's going to improve the processes, the patient experience, the outcomes, and it's going to fit into the business model. It's a pretty easy decision. When you involve the patient and the technology person, the engineer, you involve, but you have to, the market that healthcare element, the administrator is part of that market. So it must be in the design process of very early phase of the product development before you do your interview and your market research, before you develop your idea and come up with a mock of a product, right, or a pilot or a prototype or minimum viable product. So it must involve them as well.
Okay, Rafael, Dipak, Mark, we will have to end the discussion. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for this unbelievable, interesting discussion. To be honest, it didn't quite as we planned that it would go, but we just let it go. That's what innovation is all about, and the technical crew did a great thing to realize the discussion, and so that we could follow in the best possible way. So thank you for that.